When the train it left the station, oh, I looked him dead in the eye. When the train it left the station, I looked him in the eye. Hi, I'm Pyeng Threadgill, and I'm on Musicians on the Record with David Ward. And we are here hanging out and talking about music. 1, 2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3, 4. This is huge, musicians on the record. Bring it on.
Hi, welcome to Musicians on the Record. I'm David Ward. You've heard the music and now hear their story. This is the show where we get the musician's story, and I'm super excited. On the show today, she is a vocalist, she is a songwriter who performs and coaches in New York. Pyeng Threadgill is on the show. Welcome, Pyeng.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
So nice to have you here. And, you know, one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is, you know, my wife, and you have a new album coming out, which it sounds like it's been a little bit of a time since the last album, correct?
Oh my gosh. It has been a long time. Yeah, my last record, Portholes to a Love and Other Short Stories, that album released in 2008.
Wow, okay.
I can't believe it. You know, sometimes I think, oh, it wasn't that long ago. And now I'm like, no, it was a decade. It was a decade.
Well, you were preparing for the new album, it sounds like, right?
Yeah. I was preparing for the new album and preparing for a new way of being an artist, you know, preparing for a new way of thinking about how to make art and make a living and live and not feel like, you know, you're in this sort of hustle, you know, all the time. So, yeah, it took some time to kind of reintegrate all that.
Sure. Yeah. And that's, I'm definitely interested in hearing about that, especially because with musicians talking about the business of music, it is the music business and you got to make a living. But let's talk about the art first. Tell us about the new album and what inspired it.
So Head Full of Hair, Heart Full of Song is an album that I've been writing on and developing for about 3.5 or 4 years now. And sometimes I think about those artists that I hear, like movie directors and writers who like are working on an album for 10 years. And I think, oh my God, how do they do that? And now I feel like I kind of understand, although I do not want to do that at all. So, you know, what first inspired me was actually the title. I have always been in love with words. I've always been a lyricist ever since I was 4 or 5 years old. And so I just heard this refrain or this title, Head Full of Hair, Heart Full of Song. And I was like, that's going to be my next album. Wow. And so I didn't know then exactly what it was going to be, but I had an instinct that it would have to do with hair. Yeah. You know, but I didn't have an instinct that it would be about natural hair and about identity. And I didn't know that it was going to actually lead me to really want to connect more deeply with looking at my family tree and my history. Yeah, well, you know, the first piece that I wrote for this, I think it was the first piece. I might have written Head Full of Hair, Heart Full of Song. I had like this melody that was going on in my head. But the first piece really that was different is this piece that I've written called Pearly, which is about my mother's mother. And it's a spoken word piece. And I didn't, you know, up until now, I hadn't been performing spoken word in my own writing in a musical context. So that felt new. And I thought originally that it would actually be something that I would write and perform with a dancer dancing. My mother's a dancer. So I actually kind of saw it being this duet dance piece with me performing the spoken word. And that started to open up the idea that I realized that this didn't have to just be songs, sung songs, I started to realize, oh, maybe there's going to be some poetry, maybe there's going to be some video, which is what it also has evolved into, is me creating several video installations as well that accompany the music.
So a lot of this became around family then with the album.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Yeah. So your mom is a dancer. Can you say a little bit more? Did you grow up in a musical household, and what was that music?
So my dad is a musician and a composer, and my mom's a dancer and a choreographer. They're both from Chicago, and they both moved to New York in the 70s, as part of that wave of, artists who were looking to get into the downtown scene in New York. So I grew up in the East Village in New York in the 70s. And I was in this world that my parents were in, making theater, where lots of artists were working together. People weren't saying interdisciplinary then, but like everything was kind of interdisciplinary, right? So theater artists were working with visual artists, were working with composers. And so I spent a lot of time in black box theaters and community gardens with, my parents creating art with their friends.
When did you first realize your voice was the musical instrument and you went, oh, I can play this?
At a really young age. Okay. So, when I was about 3 or 4, that's when I started writing and making up my own songs. And I think because I was around adults who they were in their natural, they were constantly nurturing their need for play and creativity. Yeah. So, if you're a kid and like the adults you see are constantly nurturing that, right, then it's completely natural for you as a child. And I think it's natural for humans in general, but if you're not surrounded by it and you don't see it, then maybe it doesn't become as loud for you. It's not like as loud of a voice within you. But so at a really young age, I was making up songs and singing. And the thing is that I was watching one of the artists that you interviewed. I forgot what her name is now, but she said that she was like, I think everybody is naturally musical, but it's that you have to find your instrument. Yeah. Yeah. And so that really resonated with me because I really feel that way. Like voice for me was so intuitive and instinctual. And I always loved to sing. And no one ever had to tell me to practice. And that's really mainly why I knew that it was my instrument, because I always find still as an adult, it's like I still just sing randomly, doing anything that I'm doing, right? Like in the shower, cooking a meal, as I'm eating, it's just like it accompanies all things. And it's interesting because when you watch young children do that too, right? They're playing with their cars, they're playing with their dolls, they're drawing, and they're just humming a little melody to themselves, right? Because there's something that's sort of very primal about the voice and self-soothing. So I feel like I connected to that at a young age, and I never disconnected from it.
Yeah. And all self-taught, or any lessons or vocal training?
No, I definitely did a lot of vocal training. So I went to a school in Manhattan called Friends Seminary. It's a Quaker school. And I was in the jazz choir there. I was in the regular performing choir. And then I went on to Oberlin College, where I studied music history and music theory. So, and at the conservatory, it's a conservatory, so the primary focus is Western classical music. However, there is a jazz department that's exceptional, and also a small ethnomusicology department. It was small at the time that I was there. But most of what I did when I was in college was take classes, some music history, some music theory, some private voice lessons, and then I spent a lot of my time in the dance department. Okay. So I actually spent a lot more of my time in the dance department and African American studies, to the point where people often, when I was in college, would ask me, they thought that I was a dance major. And I was like, no, I'm actually a music major.
That's great. That's great. And who were you listening to, Pyeng, that was the inspirational to you and said, "Oh, I want to sing like them"?
So many people. When I was younger, some of my favorite artists were Nat King Cole, Sam Cooke. So I have like these early time sort of jazz crooner type singers that I really liked. Billie Holiday, I loved Sarah Vaughan. And then on the other spectrum, I've always been like a big funk soul loving singer. So I love Shaka Khan. Like Shaka Khan is one of my favorite singers. I love Prince. I love like anything in that realm of, music. And I grew up going to a lot of kind of funk shows in the city, as well as more, I guess at the time, we kind of like, kind of like the alternative grunge kind of scene. So I was kind of into those worlds in terms of what I like to go see.
Like Nirvana kind of stuff, you mean?
Yeah, although it was like local New York bands like Burn and Supertouch and Tamara Kali and Funk Face. So I kind of liked that world. And then I also liked Shaka Khan and the Brand New Heavies and Prince and things like that.
That's fantastic. Wow. So a lot of musical education just comes in from listening, quite frankly. And obviously with singing, did you try other instruments or just said, nope, singing is it for me?
I took piano for like 2 beats, when I was younger. And my parents couldn't, maintain like consistent lessons for me. But I wonder what it would have been like if they would have really had to try and keep me practicing on a regular basis.
Yeah.
I did, my dad's first instrument is flute. So I feel, both my younger sister and I both had to take flute. Okay. And I did that for a little while and then I stopped. I do like the flute, actually. It's a really fun instrument to play, but I'm not at all proficient on it. Okay. And I write music on piano and I sing. So piano has always been kind of the instrument that I refer to, although I would never consider myself a pianist, So I've taken a couple of different instruments, but really it's the voice that's my primary instrument, and then I write on the piano.
Yeah, and the writing on the piano just some of the helps with the basic chords and the song structure and where you're going for the framework, right?
The framework and and a lot of times, kind of the bass, like the groove that the groove and the harmonic structure, just like you're saying. Yeah. A lot of times the way that I write is that I often will create this sort of rough sketch where I have kind of a top and a bottom line. And then I'll bring that to my band and it's like we fill it in a lot of the times.
That's great. Tell me about your band and who are you playing with?
Yeah, so these days I have on bass Derek Nevergelt, who I've been working with now maybe also over a decade, since my last album was 2008. He's been with me since like 2006 or something. He's co-producer on this album, so that's been amazing. Tyler Wood plays guests on keyboards and piano. John Shannon plays guitar with me. He's based out of Pittsburgh, but he also used to live here and has been with me in my band for over 10 years. Casa Overall is on drums, and he's also an Obi, which is really funny that I have another Oberlin alum in my band. Sure. He's a wonderful drummer, and I just feel like I have an amazing crew of musicians that I'm working with. And they know that I like things to be very open and I like to give them a lot of space to put their own input and get their voice. I always really want to hear what they are thinking of and kind of play from there.
Sure. That's a good policy, I think, for a group, right? So, yeah. And so a lot of musical influences for you and growing up and what you like and are interested in, how would you describe your musical playing style, especially the new album?
Well, the new album I am calling New Porch Music. Because it's something that Derek and I were talking about, because people are always asking, what do you play? What do you play? What kind of music? And I used to say indie jazz, Afro groove. So it's really heavily focused on groove, but also there's this connection to jazz in terms of the improvisational aspect. But now with this upcoming record, I feel like the focus is more on having a conversation. And so, you know, when you think of the porch and sitting on the porch, it's really about folk music and the blues and pop and that storytelling. So like the story is almost even more important this time. You know, it's ironic because my last album was actually influenced and inspired by short stories by different world-renowned authors. So it's interesting. It's this theme of the story. And now the story is my story and the story of people in my family and the story of women of African descent. So New Porch Music to me is really about, you know, sitting down and having a conversation, you know, with the audience.
That's great.
And really reflecting and honoring those more folk type of musics.
That's wonderful.
Blues, and soul music. I feel like that, you know, I really feel like a soul singer.
That's wonderful. So you are creating a brand new genre. iTunes needs to expand their genre there. So
exactly. Yeah.
Fantastic. And it caught my eye, one of your albums, I think back in 2004, was inspired by the blues as well, the tribute to Robert Johnson, Sweet Home. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Oh my gosh. You know, it's like you never know what's going to happen. You know, you just have no idea. I had the great fortune that I used to play with this in this duo where it was just voice and a man who's a wonderful cellist. His name is Dana Leong. He's also a trombone player, composer. And so we used to have this regular gig at this downtown cafe every other week. And it was just the two of us. And a very, very, very close family friend of mine, her mom asked me to perform in her apartment. She said, you know, I know somebody who has a record label and he's maybe interested in looking at people. And so I performed at her apartment. And this man, Rick Congress, who's the owner of Random Chance Records, he approached me and said, would you be interested in making a record about Robert Johnson or inspired by Robert Johnson's music?
Wow.
And I was like, yeah, you know, it's my first, I had nobody else was on the table. Nobody else was asking me. And so that was my first debut album, was actually covering the music of Robert Johnson. And prior to then, I really didn't have a deep connection to Robert Johnson's music. But, you know, it's kind of like the meaning of your name or something. It's like starting there and starting with my first record being a tribute to a blues artist. It's interesting how that kind of set me on this trajectory where the blues has kind of been a through line. And the funny thing is, the studio that we recorded Head Full of Hair, Heart Full of Song at, right when I went into the control room, there was a painting of Robert Johnson in there. So I was like, okay, clearly, you know, this is following me around.
That's right.
Yeah.
Good sign, good omen there. Exactly. What did you learn about Robert Johnson and the blues that maybe you didn't know before that you got a deeper connection with?
I guess, you know, I just learned, I'm not a guitarist, so I know if I were a guitarist, I would have a lot to say. So I won't pretend that. But the thing that I was really looking at and was interested in was him as a writer, as a lyricist, because, you know, that was how I really connected to him, was as a storyteller and as a wandering musician, just this idea of the nomadic wandering musician and all the traditions of nomadic musicians all over the globe. And I really liked reflecting on the fact that, you know, it doesn't matter what century you're in, it feels like we're always telling a similar kind of a story. Sure. So, you know, you listen to current pop music and it sounds vastly different from Robert Johnson, but we're still like talking about love and pain and hardship and triumph, you know, and accomplishment and fear. It's like we're still having the same conversations. And so I just really liked that and hearing how he told it in his time period.
Amazing. Fantastic. You talked about the songwriting process. Can we talk a little bit about yours and how you get prepared for that? Do the words come first? Does a melody come first? What happens for you?
Yeah. A lot of times, I think a melody comes first.
Okay.
However, I will say that often that melody may, in fact, be a bass line. So often I have like a refrain, a cell of a musical cell that will kind of keep on coming to me. And that might be the melody or that might be the bass line. And so then I might start adding and playing around, throwing in some lyrics that might be placeholders or they might be the real one, you know, and then I start building out from there. And my songwriting process, it's taken me a while to realize I'm not the type of artist who just sits at the piano and composes at the piano the whole time. It's like my composing process might be sitting at the piano. I might start like kind of humming around the house. I'm doing laundry. I'm kind of dancing. I'm going on a walk. It's like, so, you know, and things start to piece together over time.
And you have a notebook or you put it in your phone, some of these things?
Yes, I'm a big pen and paper person. I have, if I would take you around, my daughter and my husband are like, the ultimate constant gift that they give me is a journal. Because I go through them so much. Like I just have stacks and stacks and stacks of notebooks. I like paper because, you know, it really does connect in a different way than typing. And the act of rewriting things is a way that I also am able to figure out, you know, like re-editing and scratching things out and rewriting. So I do save things in my phone in notes. Mm-hmm. And I use voice memos a lot. So I will say that aspect, having a quick, easy recorder to record, I have too many voice memos on my phone, you know, like just, I mean, probably like 3+ years back that and so sometimes my studio time is literally just listening to some ideas because I need to go through and just kind of like clean out the filing cabinet, you know. It's like, okay, I can get rid of these, you know, and oh, here's actually one that maybe I want to expand on, you know.
As a vocalist, for you as a singer, tell me a little bit about what makes a good vocalist and singer. When I sing, people run away and they say, where's the sick goat? And, you know, so it's not good for anybody, but you have an amazing voice. What makes a good singer?
Well, my voice teacher, Jeannie Levetri, she developed this vocal technique called somatic voice work, the Levetri method. And I am so fortunate that I came in to meet her, I don't know, now it's been 10+ years ago. But I do think that one thing that really helps a singer is having healthy vocal technique. So there's passion and heart, which I have a lot of, but I think having that vocal technique in place too, to be able to fully express what you're desiring, what your heart and your passion wants to say, that's kind of part of what makes an amazing singer. But the other piece for me that I'm always watching and always fascinated by is stage presence, just like people's embodiment when they're live. And sometimes I think, you know, because we have so many of these voice competition shows, you know, and we get so sucked into this you know, we've got like every competition reality TV show. And so I think it kind of confuses us about what really good singing is. I think sometimes people perform too much. So it doesn't feel like the emotion is coming from the inside out. It feels outside in. Like, okay, you know, you feel really passionate, so like show us with your face and your fists. But to me, I feel like ideally that's like coming out of you and you can't even help but to, you know, have that be revealed. You know, and if you have really good vocal technique, your voice is going to show that. And then there's something about being willing to be vulnerable and graceful at the same time. And so it's something that, you know, I'm not saying I've mastered it, but it's definitely, yeah, I think it's an inside out experience rather than an outside in.
That's great. Very well said. And you also teach singing, voice coaching. Tell us about that, please.
Yeah. So, well, once I met Jeannie and I started studying somatic voice work, I wanted to become a teacher because it's such a great technique. It's so in line and aligned with the body as well as the heart and the mind. And so once I became certified, I started teaching voice, and I really felt so much more confident teaching voice because this method really gives you a process and a sequence to help students move along in a way that's like really helpful to them and to their, you know, development. So yeah, I've been doing that for, I guess, 12 years or something like that. So prior, you know, I also am trained in the Alexander technique, which is a voice and body and mind re-education method that really helps to navigate buildup of tension and stress that often comes in the body. So it's really useful for performers and for instrumentalists because we're often doing repetitive motions. And we know that when we refine our movement, that actually has a positive effect on our sound.
That's great.
Right. But it's also useful for sitting at the keyboard and typing, which pretty much everybody's doing. Right. Yeah.
Can you tell us an example of that, using that, of the Alexander technique or the somatic technique as well, please?
Yeah. So, well, for example, with the Alexander technique in relation to sitting at the computer, I have a lot of students who come to me and they're like, my neck is so tense and my hands, like, I can't feel my fingers and things like that. And one of the things that happens is that often when we're at the computer, we just get so hyper-focused on the task that we forget to keep sensing our bodies. So we forget to feel our weight on the chair. We forget about the fact that we have a head, neck, and a back, and that they can also be balanced easily while we're going after typing this email. So it requires a practice of checking in with yourself and also of intending for there to be more flow through your whole body. Is one way to say it.
So a lot of mindfulness, it sounds like, as part of that.
Yeah. Sometimes I refer to it as mindful movement because that sounds a little bit more like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. I'm not mindful. That's usually what people say. I'm not mindful that, you know, when I'm on my phone, I'm forgetting to be mindful when I'm, driving in the car other than the place I have to go.
Right.
But then we get out and it's like, oh, my back hurts. Oh, my this, and it's like, because we were forgetting about how we were breathing.
Yeah. Right. Then we become aware of it, right? When the pain starts hitting.
The pain comes in. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So how do you use some of those techniques, Pyeng, and teach others, especially with, any kind of anxiety or stress or nerves when you're about to perform live and or to go into the recording studio?
Well, Alexander technique is so helpful for performance anxiety because most of the time when we get really anxious, we tend to start to leave our body and we get more in our minds, or, we have these different type of adrenaline things that start to happen throughout the body where we just start to kind of like retract almost energetically. So Alexander technique is really useful because you start to cultivate this practice of self-awareness, this mindfulness of your body. So that can be really helpful because, it's just like practicing an instrument. At first, you're in the rehearsal room and you're doing all these different rudiments, and then you have to do the gig. And some of the stuff comes onto the gig and some of it didn't make it.
That's right.
And Alexander Technique is the same way. It's like you can practice being mindful of your head, neck, and back, and of there being ease and how you're breathing. And then you might get on stage and you might remember 5 or 10% of the time. But that's 5 or 10% of the time more than it would have been. And then it starts to become more and more. Like I can listen to the drummer soloing and I can still be sensing my feet on the ground and noticing how I'm breathing and remember that I have to come in 2 bars. You know what I mean? So it's like you just start to integrate more and more over time, just like learning your instrument.
Tell me a little bit about going into the recording studio, especially with this new album. And I know looking on your website, seeing the indie, the business has changed quite a bit, even in 10 years. But the crowdfunding and that whole process, talk about that, please. Yeah.
Okay, so in all honesty, I feel like part of why this album probably took a little longer to release was because of how daunting it seemed to me to have to do a crowdsourced fundraiser. I was lucky enough that I got a New York, I was awarded a fellowship from New York Foundation for the Arts in music composition. So I actually got a grant for my last album in 2008. And that was amazing. But if you've ever done grant writing, it is hard work and it's another job, on top of being a band leader and a musician and everything else or anything else you have in your life. So I needed a break after that. And then I was like, okay, I know I need to do some kind of Kickstarter Indiegogo thing. But then I was like, oh, good work. Oh my gosh. Sure. And everybody who tells you to do it, you're like, you have to post like 4 or 5 times a day. And you have to like think of all your different perks and prizes. And so part of it was just me like approaching, like, being on like the, like on the roller coaster, it's like, okay, soon I'm going to be making my way up to the Indiegogo. And now here we go,
Amazing. So
that was challenging, but it's creative too, and I'm really proud. I was able to earn $10,000. I had almost 200 contributors, I want to say. So, and I have to tell you, sometimes I was aiming to earn $20,000 and I got half. And sometimes I think, oh my gosh, this is so much work and this is so hard and I'm all alone. And then when I go back and I look at all the names of the contributors, I swear I almost cry like every time. It's so moving because you really feel like people really want this to be made. They actually really care. They care about me. They care about this project.
Right. Incredible. Yeah, because it's hard enough to, in our culture, asking for help is tough anyway, but then you sort of put yourself out there, very vulnerable. Hey, everybody, strangers, friends, family, can I have some money? That's not easy to do either, right?
Yeah. It's not as hard as I thought, but it's just like there are logistics to having an Indiegogo, and it takes stamina. That's what I'll say. It takes a certain kind of energetic stamina, like I'm in my fundraising period. It's like when NPR is like on their roll, it's just like, I just feel like I'm like paying NPR. It's like, hey guys, it's me again. Right. And so it just takes stamina and, but then I think that people want to support good things nowadays. We have so many things that, so many negative things going on in the world. It's like another positive project that's being made. Yes, I want to support that.
That's fantastic. And how long was that process, the Indiegogo process?
I think I did 30 days. I did 30 days.
Wow, that's pretty great. 10 grand in 30 days. That's wonderful. So yeah. And so tell me about the recording process of the album. What was that like?
So the recording process was interesting. I did the Indiegogo last year, 2017. I did it in August of 2017. And then we rehearsed in the fall. And then in January, we went to the studio to GB's Juke Joint in Long Island City. It's a wonderful, wonderful studio. And we knocked out the recording in 4 days.
Fantastic. Wow.
And so I still afterward wound up doing some of the vocals, like overdubbed some of the lead vocals, added on some backgrounds at my co-producer's studio in Brooklyn. But it was just hard because, you're just wearing many hats. I'm leading. It's a very personal project, so I'm feeling emotional. I'm also, I'm singing and I'm band leading. And then we were filming it because as I wound up discovering after we got done with the 4 days, I wanted to make a documentary about the making of the project.
Awesome.
So we were filming the whole time. So it's like when there's a camera there and you're band leading and I'm like kind of co-producing and I'm trying to make sure, are we getting everything that we need to get for all these pieces? So, I don't know. I feel like I've been doing this so long that I really am able to like fake it till I make it. Like even when I'm stressed, I just know how to keep going through. But it was challenging and it was amazing. It felt so good to be back in the studio. Felt really good.
Yeah, sounds like it was both pain and pleasure there. How do you know, like with this new album, when you finished a song, how did you get to the place where you went, okay, this is good, it's done?
It's just kind of a gut feeling. We listen, if we do, I don't like to do a million takes. I'm not a big believer in a million takes. So, between like 3 to 7 takes or so, I feel like it needs to be in there. Otherwise, you just feel like you're just beating a dead animal. It's like, okay, it's not working. Yeah. So it's interesting. There's a song on my album called Jacaranda City, and we started recording that song in the evening. I think it was on the first day or the second day. We were so tired. We'd been in the studio for like 10 hours, just getting drum sounds for all day. It was like crazy. And we started to record it. We did about 3 takes and we were all of our eyes were crossing and we were like, okay, we got to go home and do this again in the morning.
Right.
When we came back the next day and we did it in the morning, it was like the energy was not there. So we recorded another maybe 3 takes, but we were all like, last night was it. Wow. Because in the evening, we were hungry, we were kind of desperate, we were tired, we were maybe like a little anxious to connect. And all of that really was helpful for the song because the song is actually about girls protesting in South Africa. So it needs a little bit of that drive and maybe insecurity, but kind of determination.
That's great. Can you tell us a little bit more about some of the other songs on the albums and maybe a story or two about their meaning?
Sure. Let me think, what's another one that would be fun? Loose Change in My Shoe is one of my songs.
Great title.
Thank you. Yeah. And again, this is actually interesting because you're asking about writing process. I heard that title in my head when I was working with my friend's dance company in LA, and it was like they didn't need me. And so I was wandering through the halls singing to myself, as I do. And I started to sing this refrain, loose change in my shoe. And I was like, ooh, that's a good title. And I guess I'm going to make a song about it. And so this happens to me a lot where I used to have this where like in my notebooks, I'll just have lists of titles, and I'll go, okay, at some point I'll figure out what that song is going to be, but I have the title, So I'm very big on titles. Like I don't like when people half bleep it on titles, So Loose Change in My Shoe is really about young people, particularly teenagers. And, when you see a group of teenagers, they have that kind of like youthful bravado and invincibility. And it's both a very fragile period in people's lives, but it's kind of funny because while they're both very fragile, they're also very like proud. And so the song is really about claiming what you have despite whether it's like the in thing or not. So for example, loose change in my shoe is like this, the thought for me was like, there's this kid and they have some loose change in their shoe. It's like if you have holey socks, and you could be embarrassed that you have holey socks, or that you don't have $5, or that you have change, or you could be proud about it. And I feel like teenagers, they have this ability that they can actually choose to have ownership over who they are and just be like, I'm badass, I'm so great. Or, you know, they can kind of get pulled into like the peer pressure and the overall mainstream culture and what that's saying about them. And so loose change in my shoe is like owning who you are, really.
Can I also ask you about some of the, you know, research that I was doing and the website? You tell me what you're comfortable talking about or not. But when we're talking about women, African-American women's hair and girls, you talked about on your website, that's about as personal about just like talking about sex.
Yes.
You talk about whatever you want or not want to talk about, but can you say a little bit more about that and that concept, please?
Yes, yes. So you might know Chris Rock came out with a movie about hair.
Good hair. Yeah, it's great.
Hair, right? Several years ago now.
Yeah.
And I feel like that was the first time that more of America outside of the Black community, right, started to have a greater awareness over all the intricacies and complex feelings about hair for Black people.
Yes.
Right. And so hair is, it just holds so much weight in the Black community because, you know, from the time that Africans were brought to this country, it was something that was used to make a point that Black people were inferior. And so we had traditions for how to care for our hair and to celebrate different parts of our lives, whether we were married or single or maybe a partner had passed or things. And there were all these different hairstyles that were used to reflect that. And also it's a way of often for women to kind of connect and have bonding time together. So when Africans were brought here and then there was no time for adornment, right, and things like that, it was very hard when we didn't have like these different natural substances that we use to care for our hair. And on top of it, if we were being told that our hair was ugly and gross or, you know, that we were savage for it. So in order to assimilate, you know, and also to manage time, Black people started straightening their hair, which was a revolutionary and wonderful thing in some respects. But it gets coupled with sometimes, you know, wanting to assimilate into white culture. So this, you know, and then there are just all different layers of how that can play out for a person. So it doesn't mean that you don't want to be Black because you straighten your hair, right? I'm not like pointing fingers at people for that at all.
Sure.
Or if women wear weaves, it's like, or extensions. I just wanted to tell my particular story. And the interesting thing about choosing to do a project about hair is that whenever I say that I've done a project about this to another woman of African descent, whether she's Afro-Caribbean or African-American, she goes, oh, they immediately, there's this like acknowledgement. Like, we know, oh yeah, okay. You know, like I'll get like, oh yeah, I have a lot of stories about that because we all have hair stories, you know. So every woman, and also there are white women and also women of color of different backgrounds, South Asian, Latino, who similarly have had experiences, but it's particularly, there's something particular for women of African descent.
Sure.
Also just because we have these rich traditions around hairdoing, you know?
Right. Amazing. Yeah. When I saw good hair, you know, as a white guy with, and this takes a couple of hours to get it this good, by the way, you know, it was very enlightening. I had no idea. And the time, energy, commitment that it takes was amazing. Yeah. Can you say a little bit more? I'm curious about the adornment, because it sounds like what you're saying is hair in different contexts, different ceremonies, tells a different story.
Yeah, it does.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, for me studying this, which is why it's also taken so long, is that I've just enjoyed the research.
Yeah.
And so I'm still learning, that I don't know all the stories, but there are different braiding hairdos that signify different things, in different parts of Africa. So that's really interesting. And it's true, I think in the Black community, we've always looked at hair as like an extension, another thing that we can use in a way to decorate ourselves, as opposed to like, let me just put it up in a ponytail, right? It's like, well, I can like curl it this way, and I could curl this side, and I could straighten that side, and I could braid the front, and I could twist the back. And it's like, and so the idea of weaving and history became like, this weaving became kind of a metaphor for me, the way that we weave our hair and the way that African Americans' history in this country has been a weaving, right? It's there's pain in there, and there's there's abuse, and from the larger culture, but there's like this weaving story that's in there, in terms of our heritage being mixed heritage. It's like anyone who's African American has mixed blood, so it's like there's just an interesting thing around weaving and hair as a metaphor for our story in the Americas.
Right. That's really wonderful. Amazing. I'd be curious of what kind of adornment, whether, maybe for a marriage ceremony or having a baby, were there different adornments? I don't know if you found that in your research.
I did. There's this amazing book called AfricaAdorned, which is a photo book by these two different photographers, European photographers, and they really looked at adornment throughout different parts of Africa. And I'm still always reading it. It's like a coffee table book that I just always come to. But yeah, there are, I don't even have them memorized. But that's the interesting thing. I feel like in America, we don't necessarily have the same type of hairdo that's used to represent a particular occasion. But it's interesting to see, if you trace back and look at Africa, and of course that's a big continent, but looking at different parts of Africa and seeing how maybe a particular hairstyle, or maybe that, this type of clay mixed with a certain kind of oil wrapped in the hair at a certain time of year is used for a girl when she's going into courtship or something. It's like, there are all these different, and there's something that's just really nice about ritual to me, and so I think that aspect speaks to me, just the aspect of like setting an intention around a particular time and a particular event. And I think I wanted to take that on myself and encourage young women to do the same for themselves. Like, maybe I want to mark this moment, whatever this moment is, and encourage young girls that they can mark a moment and they can choose to adorn themselves how they want to.
It's fantastic. And maybe this album can be part of that initiation ritual ceremony.
Exactly. So the way that I've been offering it is, my ideal intention is that it's really a digital talisman for young women.
That's great.
So if they could have like their own little medicine pouch, their music medicine pouch of like things to help them stay motivated to owning their own beauty, that this would hopefully be one of those things they could use.
For you, Pyeng, what's the dream of where you want your music to go? I mean, you just talked a little bit about how you would like people to feel, especially young women to feel about your music. Where do you want it to go?
I think the thing that I'm really looking for as an artist is the ability to have creative freedom, creative control. That's always been something that's been really important to me, but also to have a certain amount of capital to be able to get that creativity out. And I was recently talking about this, like, for me, the kind of career that I'm looking for is being able to tour around the country and perform at, theaters, community centers, clubs, etc., where I'm doing smaller types of performances, like 200 to 500 people. I have never particularly craved stadiums. That's like not the kind of career that I want, because I don't feel like I get the same kind of connection and engagement. If it's 1,000 people, yes. And I performed at Montreux Jazz Festival, and that was incredible. So it's incredible to do that once in a while. But I like a little more audience connect, like a deeper, closer audience connection. So for me, the dream is that to be able to consistently put out my own original music and art. And I think moving forward that my art is going to look different than I thought, because I think it's not going to be purely limited to music. I think it's going to include poetry as well as video and even performance art in some ways. So bringing my art into new spaces, really.
And can we talk about the business aspect of it? Because I know you're involved in that, because you are the owner of your business. Yes. And some of it's music, some of it's movement and poetry and all of that. And especially for people who are up and coming, and maybe even that you're teaching, that would like to get to where you're at. Say a little bit about some of the pros, the cons, the challenges, the learning lessons of the business.
I love this. Thank you.
Sure.
So this is something that I really feel passionate about. Like, if people want to write me, please write me, because honestly, I think it's a disservice that we don't train artists how to actually run their lives as a business owner. So we might major in art in school, music, art, dance, but how to actually like set up as in your day to day. And I think that, it's taken me a long time, just the idea of even time management, how you break down your day is really an art for one. And it's also really challenging. And I think that we need support to do that. I think you need people to check in with. I think you need a community. And as musicians, we always have community in terms of like, we're always like looking to go to each other's gigs and network, and maybe go to this conference and things like that. And maybe audition for like some songwriting competition. But we also need support and talks around how to schedule our days and how to plan with the bigger picture in mind. So planning this year, like planning now for next year. Whereas I feel like when I graduated from college, I was really thinking more immediate. And, I wasn't thinking about myself as a business owner. Right. And definitely I would say in the past 5 or so years, that has been my focus. How do I run my studio like a business? Sure. And that has just been an interesting thing. So I already had a teaching studio. So I had a bit of a model that way. Yeah. But like, even in terms of like setting fees for performing, right? Setting fees for different types of the type of different groups that you have. So if you're an artist and you perform in a duo sometimes, or a 5-piece, right, pre-setting what those ideal fees are so that you have that. I think it's really useful if you already have that kind of stuff sketched out and you have almost like a template, so that when people contact you, you aren't always having to reinvent and reprice things. Of course, it depends on the type of event, and, you can work with somebody. But I just think, starting to define those kinds of things, because if you were a store, you would do your inventory, right? You would be like, this item costs this much. And so like, we have to start to somehow figure out how to value our time and our skills. And as musicians, we put so much time into our craft, the craft of playing our instrument. And there's so much of that time that's not accounted for. And then we do a gig and it's like $50 for the gig. Like, what about all the like 5 years that I've been like refining my technique on this one cymbal, right? You know what I mean? It's like,
Right.
what about that? $50, you know? So I haven't got it all figured out, but I know that I have a clearer intention of running things as a business. And I also think that it's, in the past 5 years, one of the things that I've also decided is that it's so important for artists to have a team. And, you know, people talk about that a bit in the coaching business, but the place that I really look to as a model is think about athletes. And so, you know, when you look at an athlete, they have like their coach of the team. They might have their personal trainer. They might have their massage PT bodywork person. They might have their therapist to go to, right? So like, I think thinking a little bit more like that as artists is really what I want to be a part of, a movement that helps to cultivate that for up and coming artists.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And even somebody's agent and all of that, right? It's, yeah, they definitely have a team. You mentioned the networking piece. Can you talk about that and how do you network? Especially, you know, we're talking about trying to get gigs as well, right? And that's not always easy. But what are some of the best ways that you've learned of how to network?
Oh man, this one's hard. You know, the best way, I think it really does help to go out and be seen. I will say that it's one of my weaker points in some ways, because I have a 14-year-old child and I have to be up early in the mornings. And it's like, it's really hard for me to want to go out at night, you know, so that's really hard, you know, but I try to, weekends are easier and it helps if I have a buddy, you know, sometimes. But the thing is, I actually really secretly, I love also going to hear music by myself. It's like, I love just going, it's like not a good thing, because I actually like to just go hear music and go home. I actually don't want to network. Right. So it's like, I have this thing, you know, in that way I'm kind of an introvert. Like I just really love music and I just want to take it in and receive and then just go home. So I have to push myself a little bit further sometimes to engage with other people. But I do think being out and sometimes being seen and then following up, you know, with people, you know, whether it's on email or Facebook or social media. And I will say social media is helpful. It is really helpful in terms of networking, because one of the things that I find that's really nice, you know, I have been doing this for a little while. So people are forgiving that I don't get out so often. And then when I do and I see them, it's like the thing that we always say to one another, or that I truly feel is like, it's so nice to see you in person, you know, like genuinely, but I've actually been keeping up with what you've been doing.
It's fantastic.
So, social media is really helpful. And I would say, you know, definitely keep track of people in your community or artists that you admire. Keep up with some of what they're doing, you know, so that you're just in touch with what's happening, whether you can always get out or not. You know, I think it's useful information, you know, and it makes it easier to connect. You're like, oh, I know that you were just doing this record, or you just did a crowdsourced fundraiser, or, you know, you just got married, whatever it is, right? Like, you know, it's nice that we actually have some awareness of what's going on in each other's lives.
Sure. Yeah, social media can be great for that, as well as going out. But it's okay, I think, to have it some just for you, right? That's a personal thing. Like you want to get fed by some of that music too, right? Yeah.
Exactly.
That's fantastic. You've got the release party of the album.
Yes.
Can we talk about that?
Yes. So on July 17th in Brooklyn, New York, I will be having a record release party, the first of several, because this will be the CD and digital release party. And then in the fall, we'll be doing a vinyl release party, because we're also pressing to vinyl.
Nice.
If you are interested, go to pyengnyc.com. So that's pyengnyc.com, and email me so that you can find out the discrete location, as it's not going to be at a public event space. So, but I will give a hint. It will be outdoors. So, so I'm really looking forward to that. Yeah. That, like, actually having that you know, when you actually have your album in hand and there's nothing like it. You know, I'm getting closer. We're getting closer.
Yes. Has the physical? When does the physical thing come out? Is that the 17th, or you get it before?
On the 17th.
On the 17th.
So next month, beginning July, I'll actually be able to hold my CD, and that'll feel really good. That's
fantastic. And people can buy the CD, the vinyl in the fall, and anywhere else you can buy music, iTunes, you can download it.
Yeah, yes. And so this will be released on Bandcamp. So if you go to Pyeng Threadgill at Bandcamp, you can already get the single, Head Full of Hair, Heart Full of Song. Maybe we'll be able to send a link to that somehow.
Definitely.
And, and the full album will be released there on July 17th. And if you're in New York or close to New York, drive on down and join us.
It's really great. Fantastic. This is wonderful. Pyeng Threadgill, thank you so much for being on Musicians on the Record today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been so fun to talk to you.
All my love all my love all my love all my love